Alright guys, welcome back, Nighthawk here, and today we're going to be continuing our little Let's Code of our Megaman X platformer. In the previous episode I was basically importing sprites from a past game that I made with Megaman X, and then I just wanted to just apply it and showcase it to YouTube here this time, and just share some of my hobbies I like to do. And also, when you get so far into a game and then you start a whole bunch of code been slapped in, sometimes you get lost, even though you might have made it, or even though you might have had nicely organized and you uh, commented like what does what, but you know it never hurts. Sometimes it never hurts to start fresh. So that's what I'm doing here today. Okay, so let's get started with some of the basics here. What I like to do, and again, um, if some of the coding that I will be doing, I would highly recommend watching Sean Spalding's videos. He did a wonderful platformer tutorial in GameMaker Studio 1.4 to help get people started and just go from there. Excuse me. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do before I create any objects is I'm going to create an execute room. This is basically a room that we will go through for like a one frame period and then execute into the next room, because this is where we're going to establish some of our global variables that we can let objects adjust in the future. So I'm just going to call this room underscore execute and then set the speed to be 60. And then for our creation code, let's see here what I want to, or pre-game variable initialization. Okay, so establish a platformer gravity. All right, so we're going to be establishing a platformer gravity, which you can use in the platformer tutorial. The reason I'm making it like a global variable is just so like I don't have to keep defining gravity in the, excuse me, I don't have to keep defining gravity in each little object. That's from what Sean Spalding did. I'm so sorry. I can't multitask when I'm typing at the same time. I have to talk or I have to type first. So I'm just going to start with that. And then down at the bottom here, once we're done establishing all our variables, I'm going to say room, go to, and then next. Because our next room will be like, well, in the future it might be a main menu, but for now we're going to make it like a test room. We'll come back to that later. Let's go ahead and get started with creating some objects here. So like in the last video, I also like to have my objects organized. The first one I'm going to make is called player, and then go ahead and just make a second one here called stage. This one here, the subgroup I'll do for the player is called Megaman X. And then also I'm going to hit save just so my game doesn't crash again, because again, it never hurts to be safe than sorry. And I'm going to hit create group again. Player types. That should be player types plural, because we'll have different armors here in the future. Controllers. And then weapons. We'll keep adding more and more in the future, I think, but just start with those. Stage here, we'll go again here, controllers. And then we will also do collisions. And just start with there. Another one we'll do, or actually a couple more we'll do effects. And then one more enemies. We'll maybe come to this later or something. Anyway, so why did I create these controller subgroups here in the player and the stage? Because one of the key things I like to do is parent like child objects into like a main object here. So for the player, for example, I'd like to make a main object that does like all the functionality, and then the player type is basically the aesthetic of the player, like the animating and stuff. The controller does all the works. Everything's all predefined. It's just with the player type here, it's just loading up all the sprite files, for example. So let's go ahead and get started in the controllers group and hit create objects. I'm going to call this CTRL, standing for controller, and then just call this XBase. This is basically going to be all like our base, our parented, our main object for like our player types here. You'll see this in the future. Um, let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and start by creating with the create event. Before I continue any further, I probably should have said this sooner. I'm sorry. It would be when you're working with, if you work with this Let's code, I would highly recommend you to have like some kind of intermediate slash advanced knowledge working with the game maker language, because it's going to be it's going to be a major essence when working with this video series, because I will be using a whole bunch of GameMaker language code from the execute code block, and I will also soon be using scripts here. And actually, speaking of which, I'm going to go ahead and start creating some groups here. Just call this player, another one called effects, and then no, just start there. Okay. Anyway, back to our player. We're going to go ahead and hit execute or an execute code here, and I'm going to quickly load up some reference coding here just to help get me started and also to help get you guys started here. Let's see. So our initialize variables. Okay. So we'll just call this initialize variables. The reason I'm doing like 3 slashes here is because when I hit the OK button here, you can see that the code block has changed to that name. So you can, instead of seeing like something called, do that just temporarily, instead of seeing the execute piece of code, you can basically put 3 slashes or something like that, and the name will change accordingly. Okay, so let's go ahead and maybe just open this up. Probably not necessary. Initialize variables. Okay, so we're basically going to be establishing some of the platformer variables. I'm not really going to go in depth explaining most of this, and this is where I say again to check out Sean Spalding's platformer series. This is where most of the stuff comes from. So platformer, just for organization purposes to help me remember, HSP is equal to 0. This is going to stand for our H speed. HSP carry is for moving platforms. We have a vertical speed is equal to 0, and then it looks like I've got a couple more variables I have to define in the player type. We'll come back to these here. There's another one here. There's another piece here. Call this game dependent variables. Like these variables below this line of code will depend on the game. I don't know how to explain that. I'm okay. Another backstory. I hate to like throw people, like sidetrack you all temporarily, but like the reason like I have trouble explaining things if it sounds confusing. I'm more of like a visual teller more than I am of like a speaker. So like I have to visually show you what I mean here compared to like trying to say something like explaining this, for example. But anyway, so is spawned is equal to false. This will be used for our entrance sprite. This will become true once we hit the ground. Can move is equal to false. It might be self-explanatory. Wall jump is equal to false. Yes, we will be implementing a wall jump. One thing that will be new to me is doing a dash. Implementing like some kind of dash functionality with the given code that I'm going to be typing here soon. We are also going to establish some timer variables. We could use alarms, but I find it just more efficient to be using some variables that decrease or that decrement when it's greater than 0. So wall jump timer is equal to 0. We will also have a shoot timer equal to 0, a flash timer equal to 0. Hurt on the side here, hurt is equal to false. We will be messing with this in the future when we add like health hit points and stuff. I'll go ahead and explain these ones since like these are not part of the coding here. So wall jump timer is going to like kind of act like as a timer for how many pixels we can move to a certain side. So like if we're bouncing off like this, that will decrement and move us a certain amount of pixels to or opposite of what we're facing, kind of to replicate that Megaman X wall jump kind of feel. Our flash timer and our shoot timer will be used for like the X Buster. The flash timer is just like how many frames can we have before like we change indexes to a different sprite index and then go back to like putting the Buster gun away and stuff. Okay, so that's that. Um, Another thing, or we need to go. Another place we need to go. Now we need to create a step event, begin step. We're gonna put this on the outside. Call this entrance control. Like when the player is going down into the floor, you'll see what I mean. You know, when you're spawning your player when you begin the stage, you know what I mean. Okay. So if I can remember off the top of my head here, so if sprite index is equal to entrance sprite, these sprite variables will be defined in our player type objects here in the near future. Just another thing too. So when our sprite index is equal to the entrance sprite, we will be moving down a certain amount of y or y pixels until we hit a specific object. Yeah. So one more thing I should do though is set the image speed to 0. And then our mask index will be equal to our MSK entrance here. The reason the image speed will be 0 is because we don't want our player, or we don't want this animating while we're already moving downwards and not touching the ground just yet. So with that, we can set y plus equal to, see if it's plus, it'd be going down. Yeah, about 4. You can play with this value just to see what feels right and stuff. If that is equal to entered sprite, and we're not place meeting, I will define this object here in a minute, but x, y plus 1 pixel below us, CTRL spawner, and call it that, I guess. All right. Well, so if our sprite index is equal to our entrance sprite, and we're not place meeting with a object that will help spawn us, else if place meeting x y plus 1 CTRL spawner. Otherwise, if we touched it, we will start playing our animation sequence here. Open up some curly braces here, and then we will say image speed equals 1, and that's roughly it, actually. So let's quickly define that control, or that control object there. But the first thing, just for aesthetic reasons, what I'm going to do is make another sprite up here. So duplicate, and then open this up and call this SPR floor spawner. Okay. Edit the sprite, and I'm also going to resize it really quick. Not resize canvas, excuse me. Stretch this to a 32 by 32 image, because why not? And then I'm basically just going to draw or type an S in. Boom. Something like that. No. Okay, we'll just quickly draw this in then. Well, actually, that's pretty good for our first attempt there. Anyway, go ahead and quickly reset that, and then let's create this controller. So CTRL spawner. We're going to set the depth to a high negative number. When you set your depth to like a negative number, it would appear in front of another object, whereas a depth set to a positive number will set a certain object behind, say, a depth. Okay, so if a object has a depth of 100 and another object has a depth of 0, the object with the 100th depth will be behind the object depth of 0, if that makes sense. And then similarly with object A having this depth of negative 1000, object B having a depth of 0, object A will be in front of object B. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So let's go ahead and just do that. We do not need to create any events here. Now our controller I should make though is called CTRL underscore floor. That will be our, like our X base, that will be the like the master controller of all of our collisions that we will be making. Like the player type is or the X base is the master controller for all the player types we will be making here. Okay. So next we'll be testing the variable if is spawned is equal to true. Uh, we'll have an open block and a code and a block, and we'll put all of our good old coding into here once that is true. One more to make it true though, what we need to do is create an animation end event, because if we don't, excuse me, if we don't include this event, it's just going to keep looping the entrance sprite animation, and it doesn't make any sense. So we'll call this the animation update controller, and then make another little comment here calling entrance. And if sprite index is equal to entrance sprite, that's not how you spell entrance. Entrance, there we go. Can move is equal to true. Is spawned, spawned is equal to true. Image index is equal to 0, and then sprite index is equal to idle sprite. Boom. Cool. Let's see. Was there another variable? Game dependent variable is spawn, can move. Okay, yeah, we got them all. Okay, and that should help us get into our blocks here. So I'm going to just make a quick placeholder so that doesn't get removed. I don't think it will get removed, but it doesn't hurt to be safe than sorry. Let's go ahead and go into our player type, our player types now. So let's go ahead and create an object, and we're going to call this obj underscore nx. This will be for our no armor x object. We're going to give it a depth of -55, and the stage or the sprite index, like the initial sprite index we'll give it is of course the entrance sprite. One more thing I should do though, back in the animation end here, is we need to update the mask index to not the collision mask index. Mask index is equal to msk underscore x. There we go. Cool. So in our player type, our obj_nx, we're going to make a create event here. But before we do add any code, we need to call the parent event and also set the parent of our control X base there. After that, we can make another execute code. Call this individual armor variables. So if you want to have different variables, you can maybe have like individual armor variables. Hopefully that makes. I'm going to be saying hopefully that makes sense a lot. So we'll mess with these variables later, but we can get into these here. But I'm going to go ahead and type these out really quick. Small hit is equal to 1. Let's see, what do I want to use? Mid hit is equal to 2. No, 2.5. And then big hit is equal to 6. These variables here will come in handy if we were going to get hit by various projectiles, say like a little bullet, we would subtract one small hit variable. So it'd be say your HP is 100, it'd be, and the bullet would damage you with one small hit. It'd be 1 minus this. If it's a bigger projectile, it'd be 1 minus 2.5. If it's like a laser beam or something, it'll be 6 here. Another thing we need to do regardless of the platformer, let's go ahead and comment HP buffs. Let's call it that, or some. You can call it whatever you want. Platformer. This one's important. Thank you. Jump speed is equal to 0. Move speed is equal to 0. These variables will define how fast we can move and how high we can jump. And that should do it for the individual armor variables there. let's go ahead and wrap this up by creating our finally the platformer coding back in our parent here. Let's put this here at the top. Get into that. Uh, call this platformer coding, and then give credit where credit is due. Just let's do that. Come back to this here in a minute. We need to define our sprite files because little me forgot like what is entered sprite. If I run the game now in a room that I could set up here in the future, the game's gonna freak out saying, "Hey, what is the entered sprite? What is the idle sprite?" So we need to grind through these now. So give me just a second here. So okay, my apologies on that. So if you didn't see over here in the background, I added the X-Buster subgroup to the weapons because I guess I imported a charge shot here, which is just basically, well, just feed it in 60 frames per second. We'll come back to this in the future, but yeah, it's just the normal armor X charge shot. Anyway, back to our coding to round this video off. Um, Again, I'm not really going to explain it as much. Go refer to Sean Spalding's video down in the description, and I'm going to go get started. So the first thing we need to do is define player inputs, which is basically our keyboard inputs. So key_right is equal to keyboard check. I'm going to use the WASD or WSAD, I guess, WSAD. Ord D, and then we'll add more inputs here. Like we'll use a max variable maybe in the future to use the arrow keys or something. Key_left is equal to negative keyboard check ord A. Key _jump is equal to keyboard check pressed VK space. Key jump held is equal to keyboard check VK space. And then for platforms or multi-way platforms, key down is equal to keyboard check ord S. Now my reference code can't see anything. So now after we define the inputs, we need to react to our inputs. We're going to define a new variable called move and set that to key right plus key left. And then our HSP therefore will also become move times our move speed, which we defined in our player type, outobj_nx. Did I camel case that? Camel case being like move and then you capitalize speed there. I forgot to name this one though. Sprite files. Wouldn't hurt to do that. Yes, I did camel case it. Good. Okay. So we'll do a gravity application where we have if VSP is less than 10, we have VSP plus equal grav, and the gravity we will define per room. So like all of our objects is associated with gravity will follow the gravity and not like their own special individual gravity. So like one could fall fast. Like for example, instead of having one thing falling faster than the other, we can have them all fall in unison. If that makes any sense. So next we need to jump. So jump if place meeting x, y plus 1, CTRL floor, our floor control object. We will also, probably should do this really quick, and also save. Always remember to save. Gonna go ahead and create a new object. Call this our obj underscore floor underscore 16 by 16. We're gonna give it our 60 by 16 floor sprite here, and then it will be the same parent as controller's CTR floor, and boom, that's done. Let's see, where am I? We're going to set VSP is equal to key underscore jump times our negative jump speed, so we can move up and not down, because that would not make any sense if you're trying to jump. For this little section, it's for like our variable jump. If VSP is less than 0, and, oh, that's percentage, excuse me, and we are not pressing the key jump held key, we are going to set our VSP to therefore equal the maximum of what it currently is, or our negative jump speed divided by 4. You can play with that denominator value. 4 seems to work with me, but again, it's all up to you. Alright, wall jump we'll come back to in a further video here, but I'm gonna quickly make our moving platform code here. Where var HSP final, because I mean HSP final is actually critical for horizontal collision here in just a second. Again, Sean Spalding's tutorials will help you understand the meaning of some of these variables here that I'm defining. HSP final is equal to HSP plus HSP carry. And then we're going to set HSP underscore carry to be 0 at this time. And then, of course, horizontal collision. So if we're place meeting x plus HSP final, y CTRL floor, which is all of our floor collisions in one thing, so we don't have to continuously type in place meeting with our floor 16 by 16 or our other floor that's 32 by 32, for example, or our crates or whatever. While we're not place meeting x plus sign of HSP final, y CTRL floor, x plus, or not v, x plus equal sign of HSP final. And then on the outside of this little sucker, we're going to set HSP final equal to 0. And then if can move, we'll adjust these conditions later. X plus equal HSP final. Alright, so that will handle our collisions when we're moving with our wall. And yeah. Now, of course, similarly, we need to do this for the vertical collision, but what I can easily do here is just copy paste, change this from horizontal to vertical, and then instead of x plus this, we will have y plus VSP. We will have instead sign of HSP final, we would do y plus sign VSP, and then we'll have y plus equal sign of VSP. Set that equal to 0, and then we don't need this condition here. We can just therefore set that y equal to VSP. And that is literally all I've got there, just to get started. What I'm going to do really quick is just to make another room here, create room, set this to be 60. One more thing I need to do really quick before I even go any further is go to not our preferences. This little global game settings here. For reasons of working with a palette shader, I need to disable our interpolation between colors and pixels because the shader doesn't want to work correctly, and we'll get to that in a future video. I mean, if I work with this in Mac OS, we need to turn that off, and if we work on Windows 8, we need to turn that off. And also, let's see, was there also a splash screen? Do not display the splash screen there. And then one more. We don't need the splash screen here, but it will be fine. Okay, so we're gonna, for testing purposes only, we're gonna call this room underscore test. We're gonna set the width to 1280 by 720. And then we're just gonna go ahead and start plunking in some things. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and add our floor. Let's see. Okay, not that. So we need to have a snap X of 16 by 16 here. What I'm doing here, if you hold down Shift and Control, you can add multiple objects in at once, and probably wouldn't hurt to add that little jump there. And then what I want to do, we should probably do something. Actually, that's a little too high. Do something like this. Something like that. Okay, that's a good start. And then we'll just cover this up like so, and that'll do that. Let's see. We need to also add in our spawner for the player, so we can, let's see here, 8 by 8. So the player can spawn in the room. Otherwise, the player is just going to go straight past it. And then last but not least, we're going to add in our player type. Alright everyone, as you can see down here at the bottom, it is the next morning. Last night I spent maybe about an hour trying to figure out why my player wasn't moving, and it turns out if I went to my player types here in our objects, I forgot to change our jump speed and move speed to a certain value. And while also I'm at it, I'm also going to adjust these values because the player moves pretty fast and he jumps pretty high. So, I also did a little bit of like adjustments on the mask index and then the animations and stuff just to make sure it spawns in fluently without any problems. And if I go ahead and run the game, I just started Game Maker for the first time, so it might just take a second here. There we go. So he hits the spawn pad and he spawns, and then we're sitting here, and if I hit D I can move to the right, and then if I hit A I can move to the left. He's still moving kind of fast, not sure why. If I hit the space bar, I can jump. I can't jump up here yet. We don't have a wall jump just yet. But yeah, everything's now basically working. We have, well, according to the collision. If I were to like draw the collision mask, it would be perfect pixel collision, but because it's not the case, yeah. So yeah, that's going to conclude this Let's Build this code. Next video, I think we're going to be working on some like animation coding for the player here, setting up some new scripts and stuff. Until then, I'll see you later.